is the worst way you or someone you know has been fired from a job? Story 1. My dad told me once about a coworker getting fired on take your daughter to work day. It was before lunch too, so they both had to be escorted out of the office carrying their brown paper lunch bags. Story 2. One capable IT employee was in the hospital due to an unexpected health emergency. They went to the hospital and fired him before his heart surgery. Edit for those asking. I was not long behind him for the chopping block, so I don't know the rest of the story. I hope he and his family are well. Story 3. I worked in retail and our manager fired a guy after his 12-hour shift on Black Friday. Could have spent the day after Thanksgiving with his family, but instead, the manager made him work in case it was busy, then fired him at the end of his shift. It was a move. Story 4. I had a friend who worked in an office doing office type. One day, his boss croaked and he was made interim boss. Anyways, he busted his in order to try and keep his new position. A month later he interviewed. A week later, his boss called him into the office and said, "You know, we really wanted to hire you, I was rooting for you, but someone with more experience and qualifications got the job. Do you mind training him?" They asked him to train his replacement. Story 5. I posted this in an AskReddit thread about a week ago, but it fits this thread perfectly. When I was in my early 20s, I was about 9 months into a job at a retail store and I had been working my off for a chance to be part of a new department that the store was about to open. I aced my review and I got the promotion to the brand new department. It was going to be more challenging work, it came with a pretty hefty pay bump, I would have my own office, and the work would be impactful to the whole company. The promotion didn't kick in until the start of the next week. I was laid off that Friday. When they were asked to cut payroll, management literally selected the people who were making the most money. My name was listed next to the salary I hadn't yet received. Instead of admitting that they up and keeping their best performing employee at that store, they doubled down and tried to hold my last paycheck ransom until I trained my replacement in the job that I hadn't even done yet. The store owner just happened to be around that day. Normally he was a very kind man and knew everyone by name. I tried to explain the ridiculous situation to him and he just told me to go home. In a rare moment of frustration, I said something to the effect of, "You know, bullshit like this kills stores." He coldly replied, "Hastings will be around longer than you." I guess the joke is on him. Story 6. I was working 20 feet up a ladder on the side of a house. I hear a BB gun fire and the pellet hit the wall a few feet beside me. After a couple more of these I turn around, tell the fat kid standing in the yard if he does that again he better be able to outrun my hammer. Mom starts screaming about me, threatening her kid. 15 minutes later, I'm unemployed. Story 7. Was fired 3 days after my kid was born for missing time because I requested the weekend that my ex was in labor off. Got the go-ahead from my supervisor, but I guess that never made it upstairs to the top boss because they got rid of me ill. Story 8. Friend of mine helped secure a big contract for the company he was working for. An incentive for getting contracts is you get a percentage of the profit. He just started working there about 2 months prior and went out on his own several states away to talk to a potential customer from a lead he got at a convention basically. "Oh yeah, I have a buddy who's looking into that, you should meet him in person out of his own pocket." He secured the deal, called his supervisor to tell him, was congratulated, then drove 12 hours back home. His payout would have come out to around $40,000 over 5 years, went into work the next day and was fired for suspicion of theft, and the boss of the division, not the supervisor, that guy is lower, would be taking over all his current stuff. He lawyered up immediately, but since he was still on his probationary period and they could fire him without cause, nothing but the finder's fee around $3,000 was to be paid to him. Basically his boss tossed him to get some free money. Story 9. I know someone who went to his company mailbox and found a paycheck. It was stamped term check. He went to his manager and asked about it. She said, "Oh, about that, you were fired." Story 10. It's a long story, but I was early in my career. I wasn't fired for a good reason and I hadn't really stood up for myself yet. I just took abuse from management and did the best I could. It was my GM's birthday, and we all had to pick names out of a hat, and we had to buy them a cake etc. for their birthday. Well, I had the GM who wanted to do his birthday in the morning with bagels, so I picked up 30 bagels, cream cheese, giant thing of coffee, and we had this stupid bagel birthday thing or whatever. Half hour later I get back to my desk. I'm called to HR and I was fired. "Oh, and thanks for the bagels." Story 11. Ex-public accountant here. In 09 one of the firms in my city laid off about 30% of its staff without warning a week after busy season. These poor accountants just worked 80 to 100-hour weeks with no days off for the last 2 to 3 months for an annual $50K salary. I would have literally taken off my boss's high heel and tried to stab her in the jugular, Happy Gilmore style, if she would have pulled that on me. Story 12. I got fired because my boss up and blamed it on me. I started my own business in the same field and made all key people leave my former employer and work for me instead. A year later they had to file for bankruptcy. The malicious delight. Story 13. We were having a departmental meeting, and the head of engineering, Myron, was giving a speech about how all of our customers are happy, and how all of his ideas are awesome. Both of these were very false, so he was either lying or is disillusioned. Next his boss is giving her presentation, and the little email message popped up at the bottom corner of the screen saying, "You need to fire Myron." Myron was soon fired, and good riddance. Story 14. Once when I worked in an office, they told us that we had to visit corporate for a presentation about harassment in the office. We were broken into groups to go on different days, Monday through Thursday. The groups got a video on harassment. The Friday group got fired en masse. The whole thing was a setup. Story 15 told my boss I had a 2-week mandatory training block coming up with my reserves unit. Got told there's no way I'm not working during that 2 weeks. Told him it's not like I have a choice. Got fired. Edit thanks everybody for the kind words of support. I told a buddy of mine about the situation, a guy from my unit, and he offered me a job which I took. I am doing better now and am happier than if I was still at the old place. You can probably tell it was not the best place to work. I guess my right to pursue the legal matter is still there, and even though my boss isn't for handling it the way he did, I've let go of the anger and quite frankly, I don't think much about him or the job anymore. Story 16 My first job ever was for Baskin-Robbins when I was 15. I went in for my first day of training excited to finally be making pocket money. The owner made me try to memorize the ice cream flavors in the first 30 seconds of being there. When I was unable to recite them perfectly in their order, he did this big hand motion and screamed training over. I laugh now, but man, that was crushing for a nervous teenager. Story 17 Not quite fired yet, but today 3 of us publicly confronted our boss over proof of her committing fraud and embezzlement. The organization serves people with mental health conditions, and we confronted her during a public meeting in front of those the organization serves. It was painful, we hated doing it, but the truth needed to come out. Story 18 I was fired from PetSmart for reasons I can no longer remember. Immediately after the manager delivered the news, she asked me if I would mind staying for 2 hours to wait until the evening shift relief arrived. Unpaid, of course. I laughed in her face and left. Story 19 Girl I knew was here on work visa. She had been working at a company for several years that treated her well but ended up moving and got a job at a new one. Her boss apparently used her as a scapegoat, set her up with impossible bullshit tasks like planning the office Christmas party about a week beforehand, then fired her shortly before Christmas. That meant her work visa expired and she was going to be sent back to her home country. Apparently it's the law that the employer in this case pay for the fired employee's plane ride home, and her boss chose to fly her out on Christmas. Story 20 Girl was a meth user, and had a playful nickname Twitch among the nursing staff. Problem was, she was a major suck-up to management, so they looked the other way and just called her quirky, until she twitched so hard she fell out of a chair and ruined a couple of blood samples, delaying a few surgeries. Expensive liability, major public disaster, so a drug test could no longer be avoided. She made a second major scene fighting over giving one, and security escorted her out of our lives forever. Story 21 This one resonates to me as I was let go 3 weeks ago. So story time I was hired at a company back in October by a woman whom I consider the best boss I ever had. Awesome person, kick as marketer, we are still friends to this day. Anyway, at the end of December before we go on a New Year break, she tells us she is leaving for a much better company. I don't blame her, the company is awesome. Now when we get back, I instantly inherit all of her work and basically become a director of marketing without the title. I proceed to bust my to pick up all the new duties, make sure everything is attended to, and try to make a case for being the replacement. While the VP goes ahead and does interviews, we meet with some candidates. Ultimately they hire the one who was my last choice of the 4. I didn't like her, she was just off. Anyway, I take it in stride and just go back to doing my job well. For the next 3 weeks I proceed to continue doing all of the work I was doing before she arrived, and then some, while teaching her the business and how we did things. Well, 3 weeks ago today I come into the office, go about my routine, and then get pulled into an office where I see HR. I instantly feel sick to my stomach. She then proceeds to terminate my position due to budget, and I am let go, no severance, no real explanation, nothing. So basically I manned a department for nearly 4 months, trained the new director, and was then laid off by her 3 weeks into her tenure. Oh, and I found out she quickly replaced me with a friend she had worked with at 4 other companies. Needless to say it sucked and I was livid. Story 22 My mom worked for a small medical practice that was fast on its way to bankruptcy. Her boss gave her a promotion without raise and over the course of the next year, made her fire her coworkers one by one. She came to realize the reason she was promoted was so her boss could make her do the firing while he avoided everyone. Her coworkers saw what was happening, but still drifted away from their friendships with my mom as they saw her as an accomplice with the boss. The stress of firing her peers and feeling completely isolated at work was really eating away at my mom right up until the day her boss fired her too. I'm sure there's worse ways to get canned, but my mom is a sweet woman who hadn't yet learned to speak up for herself, and am disgusted at the lack of character and integrity her boss had. Story 23 I worked at a chiropractic office once. One of the girls found out she was being fired when she was on Craigslist looking for other jobs and found her job posted for another x-ray technician. She came to work pissed and stripped off her scrubs in front of everyone and walked out in her undies. My hero. Story 24 I was in a wreck on New Year's Day of 2009. A drunk driver hit me, injuring my leg up really badly. The driver didn't have insurance, their tags were fake, and their license was suspended at the time of the accident. So I couldn't walk and my job was being a soda merchandiser, so I was on my feet all day long. After reporting this to my employer, they told me to concentrate on getting well and to report back to management after seeing the doctor after a week or 2 of rehab. My doctor stated I may have to have surgery and wanted to run some tests, so I called my boss after an appointment. While I was being rolled out of the waiting room in a wheelchair, my boss fired me over the phone. Story 25 On night shift a coworker comes in and tries to log into the computer system. It doesn't work, she's locked out of everything. She had also had trouble clocking in. The night shift supervisor is off that night. This lady starts freaking out and crying. She says she knew they were looking for a reason to fire her. When were they planning on telling her? What is she supposed to do now? Despite multiple people reassuring her that if they were going to fire her, this is not the way they would do it and suggesting there might just be a mistake, she is still determined that she's been fired and they forgot to tell her before they cut her access. She goes home and doesn't come in the next night either. She won't answer calls, and is out for the rest of the next week. Turns out they hadn't fired her, but they had been looking for a reason to fire her. Not calling and not showing up for work was enough of a reason, so then she really was fired. Story 26 I found out today when I got an email from a client stating, Employee X was supposed to be here today and won't answer his phone. I make a couple calls only to find out Employee X was asked to resign and nobody bothered to inform his accounts. I flew out of state to smooth things over him in the hotel lobby right now, as this happened today. Story 27 summoned 17 people, 20 of the entire workforce, to the operations manager's office 8 a.m. Friday, the day before the company Christmas party, where bonuses are handed out, usually to the tune of $2,000 each, 2 weeks before Christmas. No job, no bonus, needing to cancel a date night with their SOs. Morale wasn't too good. 2 months later another wave of firings occurred. One of the guys was partying in LA the night before and called in sick. They forced his supervisor to call him repeatedly at home, telling him it was mandatory he showed up. He lived 35 to 40 minutes away. HR was waiting in the parking lot. Parked, they handed him a packet and check, turned around and drove 40 minutes back home. Story 28 I worked at a place that was sold to investors. They brought in a hotshot CEO to bump up the numbers, then sold to our major competitor. During the transition, about 20 people were let go in one day. The head of HRM and the other HR employee F spent all day at it. It wasn't easy, since a lot of the employees had been there since the early days, 15 years, there were tears, some shouting. The awkward "hey Emma, just stand here casually while I make sure you don't get weird while you clean out your desk, also I'm so sorry this is happening" thing. After a whole day of that, the head of HR turns to the other HR employee and tells her, "Oh, by the way, we're gonna have to let you go too." You may ask, how did I know there were tears, shouting, etc.? Because that skeezy butthole head of HR shared all the gory details with my coworker the next day, in our open office workspace. She didn't ask, but he needed to tell someone. To this day I get mad thinking about it. Story 29 I made the horrifically naive mistake of telling a coworker I thought was a decent person I was putting out feelers after the clinic I was on probationary period and extended my probationary period for a third time instead of hiring me on. The very next day I was called into the administrator's office and was ordered to explain why I would be so disloyal. I explained that I had become concerned when they extended my probationary period for a third time and I was only putting out feelers. The administrator claimed that they had invested a lot of time and money into me and that I had nothing to worry about. I wasn't going anywhere, so, the next day when I was scheduled to have my weekly meeting with the very same administrator, I was feeling quite relaxed and confident. I sat casually in the office and smiled at her when she came in looking all tense. She then proceeded to tell me that I was being let go. When I asked why, "You said I had nothing to worry about yesterday." She just sighed and said, "You just don't seem confident that you're going to get the job." There was a brief moment of me silence and I said, "You mean you're firing me because I don't seem confident you're not going to fire me?" That's when she got flustered, like visible upset, smacked her hands on the table and said while shuffling papers nervously, "You know this is a right-to-work state, right? Yes, that means I don't have to give you a reason, they're just letting you go." Then she offered to call security because I guess she thought I was going to be as upset about losing that shitastic job as she was about having to fire me in such a shitty way. I assured her that security was unnecessary and that I would leave quietly. It was embarrassing, bewildering, and obviously quite unethical, but that's living in a right-to-work state for you. Oh, and working in a hospital. Story 30 A former colleague of mine said she had some big news to tell me and she'd be in town for a few days and wanted to grab some drinks. We chit-chat some small talk about how work was going, and I mentioned that I was about to fire a development company we worked with and had already signed a contract with their replacement. I went on and on for a few minutes about how pathetic the former partner's productivity had been and how it had hit rock bottom over the years. Then she told me her big news. She had just accepted a position at the company I was firing the next day, and she was assigned to be my project manager. Needless to say, the rest of the drink meeting was a bit awkward. Story 31 I worked for this woman who owned a bakery business with several locations. She was a class lunatic, but she paid well and for the most part loved my job. I was constantly told I was one of her best employees, and one day she wanted me to be a manager at one of the stores. Honestly, I gave my all at that job because she paid me well above minimum wage for someone who had zero experience in a bakery position prior to hire, and I enjoyed making cupcakes for a living. 3 weeks before Christmas she came into the store and told me that if the police showed up to give her a call in her office so she could come upstairs to meet them. Weird, but she was always dealing with something crazy like a customer she insulted or the like. Anyways, the cops came and she took them into her office to talk to them and that was that. Well, after we closed the store that night she called me aside and accused me of stealing money out of the register. She has cameras all over her store and told me she had hidden ones even the employees didn't know about. She caught me doing suspicious things on camera such as taking an envelope off the counter and coming back into the store after I had already locked up to get something I forgot. Just weird and baseless accusations. She told me she had called the cops on me to file a police report and they would be wanting to talk to me at some point. She then fired me and took away my keys for the store, and I left. I was devastated, and for the following week I was a nervous, depressed wreck. I had never taken anything from her ever. I later found out from a friend who still worked there she told every single employee I stole $3,000 from her, and probably stole her checkbook as well because it was missing. Again, this lady was insane, and I have no doubt she's the type of person to put her checkbook on top of her car and forget about it while driving away. She also told everyone who still worked there they weren't allowed to talk to me at all. That also really upset me because I really enjoyed my coworkers, but I knew most of them were so afraid of her and losing their jobs if they didn't bend to her every whim they just obeyed. For weeks after being fired, she'd randomly call and text me, and if I didn't immediately answer she would call and text my girlfriend and threaten to have the police come to our house if I kept ignoring her. Finally she stopped, until about 2 weeks ago she started harassing me again, trying to set up some sort of meeting to talk about why she fired me, but I pretty much told her it can be a phone conversation or she can off, and I haven't heard from her since. Honestly, I'm waiting for some crazy letter saying she's trying to sue me for God knows what. TLDR, crazy ex-boss wouldn't stop harassing me and lying about me for God knows what reason. Story 32. My boss was an idiot, and one of the corporate heads had told him he had to fire somebody, so instead of thinking about who to fire he waited until Halloween to fire someone. He didn't want to make an unpopular decision. It was during our Halloween party and he tried to fire our quality assurance guy, but somehow was talked into firing someone else, so this guy got fired on Halloween because our boss didn't want to look stupid and go back to his first decision and fire the first guy. There was a big argument, and our boss even tried to offer him a Chili's coupon. Story 33. I was walking into work and saw my coworker friend being walked out by the cops. He stole money from the store and was caught. A week later, I was at a different store. Turns out, that kid got a job from that store also. He was getting walked out by the cops again for the same thing. It was unreal. Story 34. Our old manager was forced by her boss to fire a guy who was a bit slower than the other servers because he stood up for himself when someone called him retarded. He has autism. Story 35. I got notice while on holiday. The day before I was supposed to fly back, I ended up just not getting the plane back and living in Holiday City with a new job 2 weeks later, so it didn't all end badly. Story 36. Creepy master. We had this guy in our department that got fired within 3 days of starting. On the first day he had emailed all the females, only the females, and wrote an introduction that resembled an eHarmony profile. Not that bad. By day 2 he was trying to get to know a few select females better. One of them was Lori, who also in my department and who had a healthy sense of humor. She kinda went with it to see how far this guy would go. He made it known how attracted to Lori he was and that he would like to give her a full body massage. According to him, he was quite good at giving them. I should mention at this time that Lori was 8 months pregnant. We had a good laugh, but at that point Lori stopped encouraging the creepy master as to not get into any trouble for inappropriate use of company property herself. On day 3, Lori started getting explicit texts. She discreetly let us know that she thought it may be creepy master. All of our cells were on a sheet on our boss's desk, which was not hard to get. My coworker, who is not discreet, hears this and loudly announces, "I'll call then find out." Coworker dials, and behind us, you hear the distinct brrr 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 of a cell vibrating in someone's pocket. Coworker calls again brrr brrr brrr. Creepy master's ears turn red and he has a 1,000-yard stare at his monitor. Lori was a pretty cool chick and could have laughed it off. It was some of us that gave our manager the heads up. Apparently, women in other departments were more disgusted by him and had already complained. Edit on mobile. Much awfulness changed Mashour from masseuse. Story 37. Headed out with family to celebrate at a Christmas Eve service. Phone dinged because I inadvertently got copied on an email from my boss to an office assistant, directing her to draft up a letter terminating me for cause. Starting with the unsatisfactory job I did painting the entire new office on my own time when I started the job as an associate attorney 1 year prior. I immediately called him to ask WTF. He responded that he couldn't talk because he was in a church service with his family. Story 38. I was one of a group of 13 teachers who were laid off from a struggling private school. The decision had been made to get rid of year 11 and 12 as a cost-cutting measure, so therefore staff had to go. The way we were told if we were being laid off or not was a letter placed in our pigeonhole by the school principal, who ensured he had left for the day and gone home so noon could confront him about it. He also again proceeded to hide in his office with the door locked when he did come back to work. We then had to work for another term before we finished for the school year. Story 39. A girl at my job worked the graveyard shift, went to the bar on her lunch and got drunk, came back and started taking off her clothes and lit up a cigarette in the building. A group of people went and hotboxed their car on lunch and came back inside reeking of pot. All but one got fired because her drug test came back clean. A supervisor and her boss were sneaking into the building after hours and having in the training room. They were not aware that there were cameras in there. Story 40. Crazy lady from the restaurant I work at was found by another server passed out, forehead on the steering wheel 45 minutes after her shift was over, and later found out she ought on heroin. She was already on thin ice for getting caught buying weed during her shift, and the neighboring business saying she's sucking some guys for either drugs or money. She was taken away by the police, who said if we didn't report this she most likely would have died. There was also a cook who during his shift just disappeared and only later found out he left because of some problem with his friend buying drugs and getting revenge against his girlfriend. Story 41. The computers in our ambulances are a little particular sometimes. and we always joke that we've been fired when a login doesn't work. Well, one day I could not get my login to work. Checked my email, lo and behold, I'd been fired. At the end of the day it was what amounted to be a clerical misunderstanding, but so far it's taken almost a year to get it sorted. Story 42. I was a teacher at a Christian private school in Jakarta for about a year before I was removed. Going into the job I fibbed a bit saying that I was a practicing Christian as the pay was pretty solid and had a buddy working there who did the same. Anyhow, the year goes by relatively smoothly aside from constant headbutting with the head of English, Jimmy. I was teaching grades 10 and 11 IGCSE and AS English language, and after the initial transition phase, my students really took a liking to my teaching methodologies. Mr. Jimmy was a very strict, by-the-book examinations every 2 weeks type of teacher, and I wasn't. I went in and figured for the kids to do well, they first needed to enjoy it, and so I spent the good part of my first few weeks getting the kids interested in various readings, neat ways of looking at writing, etc. Anyhow, this didn't sit well with Mr. Jimmy, and so we would have constant debates in staff meetings over the way I was teaching my courses. He was the head of English, I was new, I get it. But my kids were eating it up, and they were doing better than ever. Anyhow, between our clashes, and my lack of enthusiasm for going to chapel every Friday afternoon, my time at the school came to a head towards the end of the school year, as the grade 10s missed chapel one Friday to sit a test. Mr. Jimmy decided that he would give his own to the grade 10s, so one Wednesday morning myself and the other grade 10 homeroom teacher took our classes to Jimmy's sermon. And boy oh boy was it something. Now, just to give you an idea of Jimmy, this dude is an ultra-conservative Christian from the sticks of West Virginia. Heavy set, short, and slow speaking with a thick drawl, he constantly reminded students that humans couldn't have evolved from monkeys. I'm not much for Abrahamic religion, but it's never really bothered me either, and I find it's more the wingnut members of the religion that tarnish the name, and Jimmy was definitely one of these. Anyhow, we get to the little session and Jimmy says that this session would be about defending your faith, which didn't bode well. He started the shindig by talking about being assaulted, insulted and mocked by all of the Muslims running around Indonesia hating Christians. Oh boy. I had been in Jakarta for 2 years by that time, and despite the recent unfortunate elections in the city, it's a very moderate place and country in general. Not once had I heard anyone mock any religion, nor do you see people proselytizing or pushing their faith on others. Sorry, I take that back, everywhere except this Christian school. Anyhow, I kind of reach my boiling point against religions of any kind being in schools and raise my hand, and ask Mr. Jimmy, don't you think that we should just do what Jesus did and turn the other cheek? He looks in my direction, keen to my discontent, and responds that no, we need to give our children of God ammunition with which to fight the people that insult our religion. I mean, that's pretty heavy stuff for 15-year-olds. After my question, a few other students who had talked to me in private about their lack of faith, questioning of faith, atheism, etc. began to raise their hands. Jimmy goes nuts. He starts rattling off Bible passages, shouting, telling the students that it was no place for questioning, it is a school, isn't it, and generally throwing a temper tantrum. I had had enough. I got up quietly, and left the room. 2 weeks later, while my grade 11 students were sitting their AS exams, and whilst I was invigilating, I was asked by the vice principal to head downstairs to meet the head of the school. I was told that I didn't present a uniform front for the school, called into question my own religiosity, caused students to begin questioning religion, and undermined my senior. I presented my case, explained that had Jimmy heard the same sermon, but in an Islamic school, had likely labeled them terrorists as the subject matter was just too extreme. They didn't hear me out, and gave me 2 options. 1, resign with a payout for the rest of my contract about 2 months. 2, or be fired and get nothing. Realizing that it wasn't worth the time and effort, I resigned. A few days later, all of the teachers and students wore purple ribbons to school as a show of solidarity for me. Parents called the school upset. The head of the school ended up resigning and moving countries. Later, I also found out that 90 of my students ended up with A and a marks, the rest earned BS, and they were the highest ranked classes in the past few years at that school. I still keep in contact with some of my students from the school, and life only got better after leaving, so, whilst it makes a fun story, it only impacted my life for the better. Story 43. Not me, but a very close friend that was working with me at the time. His shift started at 11 p.m., mine started at midnight, and we were both given transportation from door to door, meaning, pick up at your house, drop off at the very office, every day. My friend was picked up on time and brought to the office as usual. 15 minutes before his shift started, he was fired on the very spot, for some errors he had made, that in my opinion shouldn't be grounds to fire him but for a warning and coaching, but whatever, they were clauses in our original hiring contract, so, it wasn't appealed. Now comes the bad part. In my country, the last buses run at 11 p.m. for most areas, and even earlier in some others, and he lived 2 cities away, and while firing him, they also revoked his access to the building and the business center where the building was located, and was escorted out, with no way to get home. And of course they wouldn't provide transportation, as he was no longer an employee, and neither could he wait outside for the buses or even his scheduled morning transport, since by firing him, the system automatically removed him from the travel routes. Couldn't they fire him at the end of his shift, or at least call him and let him know so he would have got to work on his bike, or at least, not showed up to work that day and come in the next morning, when there are transportation options, and then do the paperwork? It was awful. Story 44. My sister is 17 and worked at McDonald's for about a month. I was laying on my couch at around 1000 one night when my sister calls me. The conversation goes kind of like this: sis, yeah, can you come get me from work, didn't you drive? Sis, well yeah, but can you just come get me please? Me long heaving sigh. Fine. It was only a 5-minute drive, so I didn't even change out of my sports bra and basketball shorts because I assumed I wouldn't be exiting the vehicle. I pull into the McDonald's and there's cops in the parking lot with their lights on. My sister is a big pot smoker, so I immediately assume she got caught with weed. I'm instantly pissed off. I threw my truck in park, jumped out, and marched to my sister who was talking to a cop, while another cop was shoving another McDonald's employee, let's call him Eric, in the back seat. Basically my sister let Eric sit in her car until his parents came and got him because his car was broken down, and it was still winter at this point. Another McDonald's employee who didn't like Eric saw that he was rolling a blunt in the car while she was on break, so she called the cops. Turns out, he also had a warrant out for his arrest. This kid is barely 16, so I look at the cop and ask if my sister is in trouble too. The cop replies that she doesn't believe that my sister is high, so she's fine. But the cop said she can't let my sister drive home regardless, so that's why I had to come and get her. I thank the cop and they leave and I'm hauling my sister to my truck, when the manager of the McDonald's stomps out of the building and starts screaming his head off that my sister and Eric were both fired and banned from McDonald's, and that if they ever step foot on the property again, he'd call the cops. Then he looks at me and says, "You two da fuck, I didn't even do anything, whatever, you'll go to Wendy's, at least they get my order right." He also called us white trash, so that was pretty cool. My sister cried her eyes out the entire way home, and said she'd never break the law again because she was so scared. She got arrested 2 weeks ago for having vodka in her car, so that worked out well. TLDR, my sister let a co-worker smoke weed in her car, he got arrested, she got fired, and I got banned from McDonald's for existing.